Welcome to the Clinical File. I'm John Cordray, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Brown University shooting case. I will be focusing on the main mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes, I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. My analysis is based on my speculations, not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. What causes a man to spend 20 years nursing a grudge against the very idea of success? How does an elite education transform from a gateway to the future into a psychological prison of resentment? And is it possible for a person to hide a simmering decades-long obsession with perceived failure until it reaches a violent breaking point? When we look at Cláudio Manuel Neves Valente, we aren't just looking at a spree shooter. We're looking at the psychology of the displaced achiever, someone who believes they are entitled to greatness, but finds himself standing on the outside looking in. Valente was a 48-year-old Portuguese national who had once walked the halls of Brown University as a student in the early 2000s. Yet, while his peers went on to become world-renowned researchers and professors, Valente's life seemed to stall. We see a red flag here in the form of persistent academic maladjustment and the inability to reconcile personal reality with internal expectations. On December 13, 2025, that internal pressure finally exploded in the Barus and Holley building at Brown University. He didn't just walk into a random room. He chose a review session for an economics final, a place where students were actively striving for success that he felt he had been denied. Can a specific environment serve as a psychological trigger for a dormant trauma involving one's own perceived inadequacy? Valente opened fire, killing 2 students and wounding 9 others. This wasn't a crime of passion in the heat of a moment. This was a calculated strategic act by a man who had rented a car in Boston on December 1st and spent nearly 2 weeks stalking the area. The psychological indicator here is the predatory state of mind, a slow burn planning phase that suggests he was feeding his resentment daily. He was observed intermittently near the campus for 12 days before the shooting. Imagine the mental state required to sit in a rental car, watching students live the life you had once had while you plot their end. This suggests a profound detachment from empathy, often seen in individuals who have othered their victims to the point where they are merely symbols of a grievance. Valente fled the scene, but his journey into darkness was far from over. 2 days later, on December 15th, he appeared in Brookline, Massachusetts. His target this time was a brilliant 47-year-old physics professor at MIT. The connection between them is where the psychology of this case becomes truly haunting. Investigators discovered that Valente and this professor had attended the same academic program in Portugal between 1995 and 2000. They were once equals, perhaps even friends, but while the professor became a leader in fusion energy research, Valente remained a former student who never finished his degree at Brown. What happens to a mind that constantly compares its lowest moments to another person's highest achievements? This is a classic red flag of relational fixation, where a person attaches their sense of worth or failure to an existence of another person. To Valente, the professor wasn't just a former classmate. He was a living, breathing reminder of everything Valente wasn't. Valente allegedly shot the professor in the foyer of his own home. This move from a public mass shooting to a targeted personal assassination shows a terrifying flexibility in his violent logic. The police were initially baffled, seeing no clear link between a campus shooting in Rhode Island and a professor's murder in Massachusetts. However, the behavioral clues began to surface through the witness known as John. John had encountered Valente in a bathroom at Brown hours before the shooting. He noted that Valente was wearing clothing that was completely inappropriate and inadequate for the December weather. The lack of concern for self-preservation for a physical comfort can be a sign of a terminal mindset. When someone has already decided their life is over, they often stop performing the basic rituals of self-care or social conformity. John also described a game of cat and mouse with Valente outside the building. Every time they made eye contact, Valente would run away, only to reappear later. This suggests a high level of paranoia mixed with a strange desire to be seen, a conflict between the need for secrecy and the need for his presence to be acknowledged. The digital trail eventually caught up with him. Valente had been swapping license plates on his rental car to avoid detection. This strategic behavior shows that his cognitive functions remained sharp, even as his emotional state plummeted. He wasn't crazy in the sense of being disorganized. He was hyper-organized in his pursuit of destruction. The manhunt ended in Salem, New Hampshire, at a storage facility on December 18th. Federal agents found Valente dead inside a storage unit from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Autopsy reports estimate he actually died on December 16th, just one day after killing the professor. Inside the storage unit, police found 2 handguns, a bulletproof vest, and multiple thumb drives. The presence of the thumb drive suggests he may have left behind a digital manifesto or a record of his grievances. Why would a man who meticulously planned a spree shooting choose to end his life in a cold, lonely storage unit? This choice of a location is psychologically significant. Storage units are where we put things when we no longer have room for, the remnants of the life we moved past. For Valente, the storage unit might have been a physical representation of his own life, a small, dark box filled with the pieces of a discarded past. His history at Brown is also a major psychological indicator. He arrived on a student visa in 2000, but withdrew in 2003. This is a massive gap in his history between 2003 and 2017, when he finally obtained permanent residency. His last known address was Miami, Florida, and former classmates described him as someone who hated his time at Brown because he felt the classes were too easy. He reportedly believed he already should have had a PhD and felt superior to the students around him. This grandiosity is a major red flag. When an individual's ego is this inflated, any failure is seen not as a personal shortcoming, but as a conspiracy or an injustice by the world. He didn't just fail. He felt he was held back by an inferior system. This mindset creates a dangerous injustice collector, someone who tracks every perceived slight until they feel justified in seeking justice through violence. The victims were young, bright, and full of potential. By taking their lives, Valente was effectively trying to delete the future of others since he felt he had no future of his own. The psychological impact on the Brown community is profound, especially given that the shooting happened during finals week. This timing was likely chosen to maximize the symbolic weight of his actions. He wanted to strike when the academic pressure and the hope for the future were at their peak. Is the desire to destroy beauty and potential a way for the perpetrator to finally feel powerful over their own misery? We see a pattern of symbolic targeting throughout the case. The engineering building, the economics review, the successful physics professor. Every target represented a milestone Valente had failed to reach. The recovery of the thumb drives by the FBI may eventually provide more why behind the what, but from a mental health perspective, the clues are already there in his behavior. The strategic avoidance of the license plate, the stalking of the campus, and the personal nature of the professor murder all point to a man consumed by narcissistic rage. This isn't the rage of a moment. It's a rage of a lifetime. It's the result of decades of ruminating on what could have been. When we look at the history of mass shooters, we often look for a snap. But in Valente's case, it looks more like a slow, steady erosion of his connection to humanity. He moved through the world as a ghost of his former potential until he decided to become a monster. The fact that he was a Portuguese national who had achieved the American dream of permanent residency but still felt like a failure is a striking contradiction. It shows that external success or legal status cannot fix a fractured internal identity. The investigation into the thumb drives continues, and the FBI is working to piece together his movements in the years he went dark. What we do know is that a man who felt invisible for 20 years chose the loudest, most violent way possible to be remembered. His death by suicide suggests that the mission was completed once the professor was dead. He didn't want to face the consequences. He wanted to execute his sentence on the world and then exit. The psychological red flags were present: grandiosity, social isolation, injustice collecting, and relational fixation. Yet, because he was strategic and avoided a criminal record, he stayed under the radar until it was too late. This case serves as a sober reminder of the quiet threats that simmer beneath the surface of academic and professional environments. It challenges us to look closer at those who seem to be struggling with the weight of their own expectations. This is a baffling case on so many levels, and Valente chose during finals for a very specific reason, and unfortunately it was around the holidays. I think of the victims' families. I think of those who were wounded. I think of those who witnessed the entire thing. They were there. There's a lot of struggle and trauma going on in so many people. We don't realize that. We'll read about this in the news. We'll look at it and we'll see what happened, and we'll be surprised or upset or sad. But then days later, we move on with our life. But these are people who can't move on with their life. We have people who were murdered and their families who were left behind. We have those who were wounded. We have those who were there in the class. We have those who knew Valente. All these layers are all affected. And it's such a tragic, tragic thing. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? If you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. And if you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.